Chicago in late November had its way of biting into the skin. The winds along the riverfront carried a sharp chill that slipped beneath coats and into bones. But for Selena Smith, the cold was nothing compared to the weight in her chest. The city's glass towers shimmered against the fading daylight, relentless and unforgiving, much like the life she carried on her weary shoulders. Selena worked at a small cafe tucked between towering office buildings in the heart of downtown, and every day blurred into the next grinding beans, pouring coffee, offering polite smiles to strangers too wrapped up in their lives to remember her face. She was efficient, steady, invisible in all the ways she was expected to be. And yet beneath her calm exterior lived a quiet fire, a refusal to let the city break her, even if it chipped away at her piece by piece. That evening, she wiped the counter for what felt like the 100th time when the door opened with a gust of icy air. A tall, broad-shouldered man walked in, wrapped in a perfectly tailored coat that whispered of money and power. His presence seemed to still the cafe, drawing every gaze without asking. Victor Scott. She didn't know his name then, but instantly recognized the type. The air of control, the subtle arrogance, the kind of man who commanded rooms and probably never had to wait for anything. His eyes were pale, clear as winter skies, but they held a storm that hinted at something more complicated than privilege. He stepped up to the counter, and for a moment, his gaze locked with Selena's. She felt it immediately, like being pulled into a current she hadn't prepared for. Black coffee. He said, his voice smooth, deliberate, carrying an authority that made even the hum of the espresso machine seem to pause. Selena arched an eyebrow, resisting the urge to bristle. Size large, he replied. His eyes flickered briefly over her name tag, and his lips quirked, as if he found something about her unexpectedly interesting. She turned to make his drink, aware of his gaze following her movements. It wasn't the leering look she was used to from strangers, nor the dismissive glance of wealthy customers who saw only her uniform. It was sharper, searching, as if he were cataloging the most minor details about her. The rhythm of her hands, the straight line of her posture, the quiet calm she refused to let anyone take from her. When she set the cup down, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact was fleeting, but it sent an inexplicable shiver through her. He didn't thank her. Instead, he gave her one last unreadable glance before turning and leaving, his long strides purposeful, as if he had forgotten her. But Selena hadn't forgotten him, and she knew, in the strange way intuition sometimes speaks, that this was not the last time their paths would cross. The cafe grew quiet again, but her thoughts refused to settle. Something was unsettling about him, something magnetic and dangerous. She shook it off, forcing herself back into routine, unaware that a single cup of black coffee had already tethered her to a world far beyond the narrow walls of that cafe. 2 nights later, fate, or maybe the city, pushed them together again. Selena had just finished her shift and was walking through Central Park, the cold biting her cheeks. She cut through the park often. It saved her 10 minutes on the way back to her tiny Brooklyn apartment. That's when she saw him. Victor Scott, the man of the crisp coat and piercing eyes, sat on a bench with a bottle in his hand. His tie hung loose around his neck, his jacket carelessly unbuttoned, as though he had finally let the world's weight slip off his shoulders. He wasn't the man who had walked into her cafe with calculated poise. He looked human, broken even. For reasons she couldn't explain, she slowed her steps. Maybe it was curiosity, or that quiet fire inside her always pushed her toward the things people preferred to ignore. "You're going to freeze out here," she said before she could stop herself. His head snapped up and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes for a split second. "It's you," he murmured, as if the sight of her in the night was more than a coincidence. She replied that I worked 2 blocks away, defensive, though he hadn't accused her of anything. Victor studied her, his gaze sharper now, cutting through the haze of alcohol. "Funny. I don't usually get interrupted in this city. People tend to mind their own business. Maybe they should, she said softly, then hesitated. But sometimes people need someone to interrupt them. His lips curved into something between a smirk and a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. And you think I'm one of those people? She shrugged, tucking her hands into her coat pockets. No one sits on a park bench in the middle of November, looking like the sky just fell unless something's wrong. For a long moment he said nothing. The wind whipped between them, carrying the faint scent of whiskey from the bottle in his hand. And then quietly, almost as if confessing to himself rather than her, he muttered, "Everyone leaves eventually." Selena didn't know what he meant, but the ache in his voice was undeniable. She thought of leaving, telling herself it wasn't her problem. But something about the man before her, a billionaire unraveling in the dark, rooted her to the spot. She sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between them. Then, "Maybe you've been sitting in the wrong places," she said. It was a small thing, a simple sentence tossed into the night air, but it made Victor turn and look at her. His gaze lingered, and for the first time it wasn't heavy with calculation or pride. It was softer, curious. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but charged with something unnamed. Selena felt a pull, an awareness, as if the city had gone quiet to listen. Eventually she stood. "Don't stay out too long. The cold isn't forgiving." Victor didn't stop her as she walked away, but his eyes followed her until the night swallowed her figure. And though neither admitted it, then they knew something had shifted. Selena lay in her small apartment that night, staring at the ceiling. She should have forgotten him, another stranger in a city of millions. But the memory of his eyes, of the broken weight in his voice, refused to leave her. And across the city, in a penthouse high above Manhattan, Victor Scott set aside his glass and thought of her too. The woman who had spoken to him as though he were not a billionaire, not a name on magazine covers, but simply a man in the cold. Their worlds had collided once, and already the story was in motion. And this, dear listener, is only the beginning of Victor and Selena's story. If you felt the spark in their encounter, don't let it fade like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow our channel to stay with us as the story unfolds. Each part will take you deeper into their world, battles, secrets, and love that dares to bloom where no one expected it. Sometimes a one-chance meeting is enough to change everything. The city wore its usual mask the next morning. New York was a machine that never paused, its steel and glass towers cutting against the sky, as though daring the world to match its pace. For Victor Scott, mornings were no different, meetings, stacked back-to-back phone calls that never ceased, a life run by clocks and dictated by the endless pull of money. He had trained himself to perform with precision. Every step, every look, every word had its place in the carefully curated empire he had built. To outsiders, he was the kind of man whose life appeared flawless, young, commanding, and successful. They saw the photographs in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, the penthouse dinners with senators and CEOs, the sleek black cars waiting outside his skyscraper headquarters. But no one was supposed to notice the fractures beneath the polished armor. Victor had learned to wear silence like another suit. It covered the spaces where grief lived, where memories still clawed at him. And though he had built walls higher than the towers his company owned, there were nights like the one in Central Park, when the cracks widened, spilling truths he tried desperately to contain. Selena woke to the sound of the city outside her small apartment in Harlem. The streets below hummed with the rhythm of early commuters' subway trains, rattling vendors calling out car horns, impatient as ever. She wrapped herself in a thin robe, brewing the cheapest coffee her budget allowed, her mind still circling the encounter in the park. She had told herself to forget him. After all, he was just a stranger whose shoes probably cost more than her monthly rent, a man who belonged to a world that would never open its doors to someone like her. And yet, she couldn't shake the memory of his eyes. There had been something in them. Loneliness, maybe. A kind of hurt she recognized because she had carried her own for so long. She sipped her coffee, her lips twisting into a bitter smile. "Get a grip, Selena," she muttered. "Men like him don't look twice at women like you." Still, her chest betrayed her fluttering at the thought of him remembering her face. Victor's day began in the conference room of Scott Holdings, the empire his father had once dreamed of, and he had inherited far too young. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Manhattan, but Victor barely looked at it. His eyes were on the documents spread before him, his mind slicing through numbers and strategies with the precision of a surgeon. "Mr. Scott," his assistant said carefully, sliding a tablet across the table, that the board had requested an urgent update on the South Florida deal. They're worried the press will sniff out the delays. Victor's jaw tightened, though he gave nothing else away. "Tell the board, I'll handle it." His tone brooked no argument. He was feared and admired in equal measure. Colleagues whispered about his cold efficiency, his ability to cut losses without blinking. Investors loved him because he delivered, but no one dared to ask what the victories cost him. And so even in a room filled with people, Victor stood alone. It was late evening when his driver suggested a stop at the café. Victor had resisted at first. His schedule did not allow for indulgences, but something about the memory of that woman with the steady eyes tugged at him. Against his logic, he ordered the car to pull over. Selena was wiping tables again when she saw him. For a moment, she froze, cloth in hand, as though the world had narrowed into a single frame, the billionaire stepping into her corner of the universe, his presence bending the air, the way only power could. This time, he did not go straight to the counter. He paused by the window, his gaze sweeping over the room before settling on her. "Selena." His voice carried the subtle weight of someone accustomed to being remembered. She blinked, startled that he had recalled her name from the small tag pinned to her uniform. "Yes," she replied, guarded. He studied her for a beat, then asked, "What time do you finish here?" Selena narrowed her eyes, suspicion flaring. "Why?" A faint smirk touched his lips, though his eyes remained unreadable. "Because I owe you a conversation. I wasn't at my best in the park the other night." She almost laughed at the understatement. "You mean half drunk and freezing?" For the first time, something like amusement cracked his facade. "Exactly." Her shift ended within the hour, and though every rational thought told her to walk away, curiosity overruled. She sat across from him in the quiet corner of the café, the steam from their cups curling upward between them. Victor was not a man who offered himself easily, but with Selena, words slipped out before he could stop them. He told her about the empire he ran, the constant scrutiny, the way money solved everything except the hollowness inside. He didn't tell her names, didn't speak of the betrayal that still haunted him, but he spoke enough for her to glimpse the man beneath the armor. Selena listened without judgment, her dark eyes steady, absorbing his confessions, like a tide smoothing sharp stones. When she finally spoke, her words cut through his carefully constructed narrative. "You think being untouchable makes you strong," she said softly, "but it may make you lonely." Victor stilled his gaze, locking onto hers. Few dared to speak to him this way. Fewer still left him without a retort. Something inside him shifted. He had met countless people, power brokers, politicians, women who smiled with lips but not eyes. But this woman in her simple uniform, with tired hands, saw him, and that terrified him more than anything. When the evening ended, Victor offered her a ride home. Selena refused, insisting she could take the subway. He didn't press, though he watched her enter the cold night with an expression he did not understand. As she descended the subway stairs, Selena exhaled sharply, scolding herself. "You can't fall into this. He's not your world. He never will be." Yet deep down she knew the line between their worlds had already begun to blur. Later in his penthouse high above the city, Victor poured himself a drink, but left it untouched. He stood before the vast window, looking at the sprawl of lights below. For years the skyline had felt like his, something he owned that bent to his will. Tonight it seemed hollow, lifeless. And in the quiet, his thoughts returned to her. The woman who had dared to sit across from him without fear. The woman who told him truths no one else had dared whisper. Victor Scott, who trusted no one, felt the faint stir of something dangerously close to need. Selena lay awake in her small Harlem apartment, the rhythm of the city outside her window pulsing through the night. She told herself she was foolish to think of him and replay every word and glance. Yet the memory lingered the way his mask had slipped the shadow in his eyes. It wasn't the attraction that unnerved her, though she would not deny that the man's presence was magnetic. It was recognition. She knew the weight of carrying sorrow alone. She knew what fighting meant when the world expected you to crumble. And though she vowed not to get pulled into something that could only break her, a quiet part of her whispered that perhaps for once she didn't want to run. The city moved on, unknowingly. But in the hidden corners of Manhattan, a cafe table, a park bench, a penthouse window, a thread had been spun between two people from opposite worlds, fragile, unspoken, yet undeniable. It was the kind of thread that could unravel everything, or weave together something neither of them had dared to dream. And though neither Victor nor Selena admitted it aloud, both felt the same truth settling deep in their bones. Their lives, once parallel, were now set on a collision course that would change them forever. The winter sun had dipped early, casting a gray haze across Manhattan, when Selena pushed open the cafe doors for her shift. The familiar scent of roasted beans wrapped around her like an old blanket, comforting in its ordinariness. She tied her apron, tucked the stray curls of her hair behind her ears, and reminded herself that life went on as it always had, one coffee order at a time, one paycheck closer to rent. And yet, ever since that evening with Victor Scott, something in her refused to settle. His words had lodged themselves in her chest, heavy and unyielding. She had not wanted to care, not about the grief in his voice or the shadows behind his careful composure. But she had, and that unsettled her more than anything. She wiped down the counter with deliberate focus, telling herself she was foolish to think he would ever step into her world again. Men like him didn't linger on women like her. That was why when the cafe bell chimed, and he walked in tall, sharp, and impossibly out of place, Selena's hand froze mid-motion. Victor didn't glance at the menu or join the line. He cut through the low chatter of the cafe with his presence alone, stopping just short of the counter. He wore the kind of suit that seemed tailored by the gods themselves, a dark charcoal that set off his pale eyes. But it wasn't his wealth that caught Selena's breath. It was the intent in his gaze. Selena. He said her name steady and sure on his lips, as though he had rehearsed it. She blinked, gripping the rag in her hand a little tighter. Mr. Scott. Around them, a few customers turned curiously. The billionaire in their neighborhood cafe. It was a scene made for whispers. Victor's mouth curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. I want to speak with you, privately. Selena's brows arched. I'm working. I'll wait. He moved to a corner table, unbothered by the curious eyes, unhurried by the passing time. And wait he did. For 2 hours through the evening rush and the chatter of regulars, he sat with the quiet patience of someone who always got what he wanted. When her shift finally ended, Selena hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to leave to keep the boundary between their worlds intact. But curiosity, sharp and restless, betrayed her once again. She untied her apron, walked over, and sat across from him. All right. You've waited. What do you want? Victor studied her, his eyes unreadable. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and deliberate. Then he leaned forward, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Please work for me." Selena laughed, startled by the audacity. "Excuse me." "As my assistant," he clarified. "Temporary. I need someone who isn't tangled in corporate games and can trust outside the circles I know." "You're different." Selena shook her head, incredulous. "Different? You barely know me." "I know enough," he replied calmly. "I know you don't flinch when people bare their truths. I know you don't say what you think others want to hear. And I know you see past the masks. That's rare." Her throat tightened. How he said it, as if he had memorized her in a single evening, left her unsteady. "You don't want an assistant?" she challenged. "You want a shield, someone to hold your secrets?" His eyes flickered the faintest crack in his composure. "Perhaps, but I'm offering a chance you won't find behind this counter. The pay will be more than fair." "The exposure, I don't need exposure," she cut in, her voice sharper than intended. "And I don't want to be your charity case." Victor's jaw tensed, but he didn't back down. "This isn't charity. It's a necessity." She stood pacing the small space beside the table. His words rattled inside her, clashing with the life she had built brick by brick. She had fought too hard to stand alone, to owe anyone, especially not a man who could crush worlds with a phone call. Yet part of her, the reckless part, ached to know what it might be like to step out of the shadows of survival and into a world where possibilities stretched wider than she dared to dream. She turned back to him, arms crossed. "Why me, Victor? Out of everyone you could hire, why pick a stranger from Harlem?" Victor's gaze softened, just barely. "Because sometimes strangers see us clearly than those closest. And because you remind me of something I've forgotten." Selena's breath caught her defenses warring with the quiet ache in his tone. "Miami," he said suddenly. She frowned. "What, my next project?" "I'm flying down in 3 days. If you agree, you'll come with me for a few weeks. I'll cover everything: travel, lodging, and salary." Her head spun. Miami. A city she had only seen in postcards and on television. She wanted to laugh at its absurdity. She wanted to scream that he was insane. Instead, she whispered, "You don't even know if I'm qualified." His lips curved, calm and assured. "I'll decide what qualifies." Something in his certainty both infuriated and unnerved her. "Can you walk in here and rewrite my life?" she demanded. Victor's voice dropped low and measured. "I don't want to rewrite it, Selena. I want to offer you a different page." That night, Selena tossed in her bed, Harlem's hum alive outside her window. She replayed his words until they tangled in her dreams. A different page. She thought of her mother, who had worked double shifts for years only to leave this world too soon. She thought of the rent notices piling on the kitchen counter of the college degree she had once dreamed of but could never afford. And she thought of Victor Scott, the man who had everything but carried loneliness like a scar. Was she a fool for even considering it? Probably. But fools, she mused, sometimes leapt into lives greater than they imagined. Victor stood by the window again in his penthouse, watching the skyline pulse with restless light. He had taken risks that toppled rivals, gambled fortunes on instinct, and won. But asking Selena was a different kind of gamble that left him unsettled. He told himself it was a strategy, that he needed someone untethered to his world's corruption, that she was useful. But in the silence of the night, he admitted the truth. He would never voice aloud. Selena made him feel human. And humanity, in his life of steel and glass, was the rarest luxury of all. 2 days later, Selena found him waiting outside the cafe again. His black car gleamed at the curb, his presence a sharp contrast to the faded brick of the neighborhood. Well, he asked, his tone deceptively casual. Selena crossed her arms, studying him. You're not going to let this go, are you? No, Victor said, because I don't make offers twice. The defiance in her chest rose like fire, yet so did the pull of something more profound, dangerously close to hope. She exhaled, steadying herself. If I say yes, it's on my terms. I'm not your puppet. And if you try to turn me into one, I walk. Victor's expression didn't change, but his eyes gleamed with something rare respect. Agreed. And in that single word, Selena knew her life was about to shift in ways she couldn't yet fathom. The car door opened, and the driver waited. Selena hesitated for a final heartbeat, the weight of choice pressing against her ribs. Then she stepped inside with a breath that tasted of both fear and daring. The door closed with a quiet thud, sealing her fate. Manhattan blurred past the window as the car pulled away, carrying her not just toward Miami, but toward a future neither she nor Victor could predict, a future where their worlds would collide more fiercely than either had ever imagined. The plane touched down in Miami, under a burnished sky, the last strokes of sunset painting the horizon in orange and rose. Selena pressed her forehead to the glass, her breath fogging the window, as the city stretched below her in shimmering lights. She forgot New York's chaos for a moment, the doubts gnawing at her, and marveled. Palm trees lined boulevards like sentinels. The coastline curved in brilliance, where ocean met the sprawl of glass towers. Everything looked like a dream, the kind you wake from and ache to fall back into. And then Victor's voice cut through, low and composed, reminding her exactly why she was here. He said, "We'll be staying at my estate," fastening his watch with mechanical precision. "It's private, away from unnecessary eyes." Selena glanced at him, his profile illuminated by the cabin lights. "You mean away from people you can't control?" His lips twitched, though he didn't take offense. "Control is a matter of perspective." She smirked. "That's not what people call it, but it's where I come from." His gaze flicked toward her fully, for the first time since they'd boarded. There was no annoyance there, only interest. Her refusal to bow to his language intrigued him more than submission ever could. The black car glided up a long, palm-shaded driveway, stretching into another world. A white stone and glass mansion rose at its end, sprawled against the ocean's edge. Waves crashed below cliffs, their roar softened by distance, but the scent of salt drifted through the air, intoxicating and wild. Selena stepped out, her sneakers crunching on marble steps. For a long moment she stared. The estate was beautiful in a way that almost hurt. Gardens were manicured like artwork, infinity pools catching the starlight, and balconies that seemed to whisper secrets and loneliness. "This is where you live?" she asked, though she realized instantly how naive it sounded. Occasionally, Victor replied, striding past her, as if the grandeur meant nothing. "It serves its purpose." Selena turned incredulous. "Purpose, Victor? This house looks like a magazine cover. People would kill to have a fraction of this." He stopped at the door, glancing back with that cool detachment that infuriated and fascinated her. People often kill for less. The words sent a shiver down her spine. The next morning, Selena woke to sunlight pouring through glass walls. The room she'd been given was larger than her entire apartment in Harlem, the bed so soft she'd drowned in its luxury, and resented herself for liking it. But there was no time to indulge. Victor's assistant, an older man named Daniel, knocked on her door promptly at 7. "Mr. Scott is waiting in the study." Selena dressed quickly, nerves tugging at her. She wasn't sure what awaited her, but she knew instinctively it would be nothing like the cafe counters she was used to. She was right. The study was a command center, screens glowing with stock markets folders, stacked with contracts, phones ringing in clipped tones. Victor sat at the head of it all, immaculate in a navy suit, his focus sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't look up when she entered. "You're late." She bristled. "It's 7 o'clock." His eyes lifted icy and precise. "Punctuality isn't about the clock. It's about readiness. You weren't ready." Her cheeks burned, but she bit her tongue. This was his arena, and she was a novice trespassing in it. For hours, she shadowed him. Meetings were conducted over sleek conference tables, video calls with partners across time zones, and negotiations that teetered between charm and steel. Victor navigated it all with ruthless grace, wielding silence as a weapon and words as currency. Selena scribbled notes, answered small tasks, and fetched files she barely understood. At one point, a CEO twice her age muttered condescendingly about her inexperience, and before she could respond, Victor's voice sliced through the room. "She's here because she sees what you miss. You should listen." The room fell silent. The man reddened, and Selena, stunned, realized he had defended her, perhaps not out of kindness, but out of something more deliberate. By evening, Selena was exhausted, her head pounding with information she couldn't yet process. She found Victor alone on the balcony, the ocean stretching endlessly before him. She said, "You could have told me this was the pace collapsing into a chair." He didn't turn. "If I had, you might not have come." "Exactly," she muttered, rubbing her temples. "You don't just throw someone into the fire." "You survived," he said, as if that mattered. Selena glared. "That's not survival. That's chaos. You expect perfection without preparation." Victor finally faced her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Perfection isn't born of preparation, Selena. It's born of pressure." The words struck her harder than she wanted to admit, because she had lived a life of pressure. Every bill, every responsibility, every loss, it had shaped her resilience. And yet hearing it from his lips made her rebel. "Not everything has to be a battle," she said softly. "Sometimes people need breathing space." For a fleeting second, something in his eyes shifted, an echo of the man she had seen in Central Park, haunted and human. But then it was gone, replaced by steel. "You mistake comfort for kindness," he replied, "and kindness has no place in my world." That night, Selena wandered the halls of the estate restless. She stumbled into a gallery lined with photographs, black and white portraits, landscapes, candid shots. In one frame, a young boy with striking blue eyes grinned at the camera, sunlight caught in his hair. In another, a family at the edge of a lake, joy spilling from every corner. And then she saw the shift. The later photographs were sparse, colder. Victor stood in most of them alone, his smile gone, his posture rigid. "Curious." She jumped, turning to find him in the doorway. His tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, vulnerability clinging to him like a shadow. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said quickly. "You did," he countered, though his tone lacked venom. "But everyone does eventually." Selena studied the boy in the photograph, then the man before her. "What happened to him?" she asked softly. Victor's jaw tightened. He learned. Learned what? That trust is currency. And once you spend it, you never get it back. The rawness in his voice stole her breath. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire, not the strategist, but the boy who had lost something irreplaceable. She wanted to reach for him to remind him that trust could be rebuilt, but she held herself back. Some walls couldn't be scaled in a single night. The next day brought a gala. Victor insisted she attend dressed by his stylist in a gown of emerald silk that clung to her like water. Selena caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. When she entered the ballroom at his side, heads turned, murmurs rippled. The billionaire had brought someone new, and not someone from his world. Victor's hand rested on her back, firm, claiming. He leaned down, his breath brushing her ear. "Remember, appearances matter." Selena stiffened at you. To all of them, he corrected his gaze, scanning the crowd. Throughout the evening, she played her role, polite smiles, careful answers, enduring the thinly veiled curiosity of socialites who saw her as a novelty and a scandal. But beneath the crystal chandeliers, amid the music and laughter, she felt like an imposter. When a woman in diamonds whispered too loudly, "She'll never last," Selena excused herself to the balcony, her chest tightening. Victor followed moments later. "They're irrelevant," he said quietly. "Easy for you to say," she snapped. "They don't see you as a mistake." He reached for her, then not touching, but close enough that the heat of him wrapped around her. "You're not a mistake, Selena. You're the only part of this evening that feels real." The honesty in his tone shattered her defenses. She wondered if the distance between them could truly close for a suspended heartbeat. But just as the air thickened, a flashbulb exploded behind them. A photographer had slipped onto the balcony, his camera capturing the moment. Victor's face hardened, the intimacy shattered. "We'll deal with this," he muttered, ushering her back inside. Heart pounding, Selena realized the truth instantly. She was no longer just a witness to his world. She was part of it now. And that meant she was vulnerable to everything, his power secrets, and the storm that came with standing at his side. The morning after the gala, I arrived wrapped in silence. Sunlight poured into Selena's room, in Victor's Miami estate, soft and golden, the kind of light that usually promised serenity. Yet her body carried none of it. Her head throbbed with fragments of the night before, the glittering ballroom, the diamond-studded stairs, the whispers that stung like invisible knives. And then Victor's voice on the balcony, low and raw, calling her the only thing real. She pressed her hands to her chest, as if she could steady the rhythm of her heart. When she descended to breakfast, she found Victor already there. He was seated at the far end of the long glass table, posture-perfect coffee steaming at his elbow, eyes buried in a file. To anyone else, he might have looked impenetrable. To her, after last night, he looked weary. "Morning," she said softly. His head lifted. Blue eyes met hers. A beat passed before he inclined his head slightly. "Morning." The word was clipped and controlled, but Selena noticed how his fingers curled a fraction tighter around the handle of his cup. He was guarded again, as if the honesty he'd let slip on the balcony had to be buried beneath iron walls. She sat across from him, the distance between them exaggerated by the size of the table. Bowls of fruit and croissants sat untouched. For a long time they ate in silence, the only sound the crash of waves outside the estate. Finally, Selena spoke. "Are you always this charming over breakfast?" Victor's gaze flicked to her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Depends on the company." "And am I considered acceptable company?" she pressed. His silence stretched taut as a wire. Then, almost reluctantly, more than acceptable. It was a small concession, but felt like a doorway cracking open to Selena. Later that day, she returned to the gallery where she had found the photographs. They drew her like gravity, the boy with the sunlight smile. The family is laughing at the lake, the sudden shift into coldness, into solitude. She hadn't heard Victor enter, but his voice came from behind her, low and distant. "You keep coming back here." Selena turned. He leaned against the door-frame jacket, discarded his shirt sleeves, rolled to his forearms. He looked younger like this, less billionaire, more man. "These pictures tell a story," she said carefully. "One you don't share in boardrooms." He stepped closer, his gaze on the photograph of the boy. That boy was a fool. Selena's chest tightened. No. That boy was happy. Victor's jaw hardened. Happiness is a luxury. It doesn't last. It never does. Something in his tone, brittle and resigned, struck her deeply. She wanted to reach for him, but instead she asked, "What happened, Victor?" His eyes cut to hers, sharp and wary, as though weighing whether she deserved the answer. Finally, he exhaled, and the words came like shards of glass. "My father built this empire from nothing. He was ruthless, brilliant, but he had one weakness: trust. He trusted his oldest friend, his partner. While we vacationed at that lake, he gestured to the photograph, and that man was dismantling everything behind his back. By the time my father realized, it was too late. We lost millions, reputations, allies." Selena listened, her throat tight. "My father never recovered," Victor continued. "He died not long after. Heart failure, they said. But I know better. Betrayal killed him." Silence wrapped around them, thick and heavy. "And your mother?" Selena whispered. Victor's face darkened. "She left. Said she couldn't live in ruins. She chose comfort elsewhere." Selena's heart ached at the boy in the photographs who had smiled so easily, stripped of innocence by greed and abandonment. "That's why you don't trust," she said softly. "Why do you keep everyone at arm's length?" His eyes met hers, ice and fire clashing. "Trust is a currency, Selena. Once spent, it's gone forever." She shook her head. "No, trust isn't money. It's oxygen. Without it, everything suffocates." For a heartbeat, she thought he might laugh at her naivety. Instead, he turned away, shoulders tense. "You don't understand my world." "Then show me," she said quietly. "Don't just hide behind it." That evening, Victor invited her to join him on the terrace. The ocean stretched endlessly, the waves painted silver by moonlight. He poured her a glass of wine, his movements precise, practiced. Yet there was a hesitation in him, as though her presence unsettled rhythms he had long perfected. He said, "You handled yourself well at the gala," settling beside her. She laughed dryly. "By well, you mean not throwing champagne in someone's face." His lips curved slightly. "Precisely." Her laughter softened. "You don't care what they think of me, do you?" "I care what they think of me," he admitted. "And by extension, you." Selena tilted her head. "But on the balcony you said I was the only part that felt real." He froze glass halfway to his lips. Slowly he set it down. "I shouldn't have said that." "Why not?" "Because real things break." The rawness in his voice sliced through her. She leaned closer, her words a whisper. "Not everything is meant to be unbreakable, Victor. The beauty is in what survives." His gaze locked with hers, unguarded for once. And in that suspended moment, the air between them shifted, thick, electric, fragile. But before either could move, the sharp trill of his phone shattered it. Victor pulled away, answering briskly, his voice snapping back into authority. Selena sat back, pulse racing, realizing how close they had been to crossing a line neither could undo. The next morning, news broke. Selena found Victor in the study, and screens flashed with headlines. Her face, captured in emerald silk on the gala's red carpet, appeared alongside his. The caption, "Victor Scott's mystery companion, a new scandal." Her stomach dropped. "They're already tearing me apart," she muttered, scrolling through articles filled with speculation. Some vicious, some patronizing. Not his type. A distraction. A mistake. Victor stood behind her, unreadable. It was inevitable. She spun on him. "Inevitable. You knew this would happen." "Of course," he said coolly. "The moment you stepped into my world." Selena's eyes burned. "And you didn't think to warn me?" His jaw tightened. "Warning? You wouldn't have changed anything." Her voice cracked. It would have given me a choice. Anger flickered across his features for the first time, not at her, but at himself, perhaps. He strode toward the window, fists clenched. "Choices are illusions," he said harshly. "In my world, there are only consequences." Selena's heart pounded, torn between fury and the ache of wanting to reach him to remind him he wasn't alone in this storm. But his walls were rising again, and she feared that if she didn't break through soon, they would bury him, and maybe her along with him. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered back to the terrace, the ocean restless beneath the moon. And she found him there, too, leaning against the railing tie, undone hair ruffled by the wind. For once, he didn't speak first. "You push people away before they can leave you," Selena said softly. "But all that does is make you lonelier." Victor's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't deny it. Maybe, he said finally, his voice was rough, but loneliness was safer. Selena stepped closer, her hand hovering near his, not quite touching. "Or it's just another prison." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, a pull, a possibility. Victor looked away first, his breath unsteady. "Be careful, Selena. The closer you get, the more dangerous it becomes." Her pulse thundered, but she whispered, "Maybe I'm not afraid of danger." And for the first time he smiled, a fleeting, broken smile that belonged not to the billionaire, but to the boy in the photograph. Selena knew then that she was standing on the edge of something perilous and precious. Victor Scott was a fortress of steel and secrets, but cracks were forming, and through those cracks, she glimpsed a man who, against all odds, might still be capable of love. She didn't know how high the cost would be for him, for her, for both. The storm came not with thunder, but with ink on paper. Selena woke late the next morning, sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains, but her peace evaporated when she saw the folded newspaper at her door. She hesitated, her fingers hovering before picking it up. The front page was merciless. Victor Scott and his scandalous companion. Distraction or danger. Her photo, captured an emerald silk hand, resting lightly on Victor's arm, dominated the layout. The article twisted her into a spectacle. A secretary turned Cinderella. A woman who had no business in billionaire circles. A liability to Scott Enterprises. Her stomach knotted. When she found Victor in the study, he was surrounded by advisors, their voices sharp and urgent. The mahogany table was cluttered with financial reports, stock tickers glowing red across the screens behind them. "She's becoming a problem," one man said, gesturing toward the paper. "The board's already questioning your judgment." Another chimed in. "Our rivals are circling like vultures. If we don't control this narrative, they'll weaponize it against us." Selena froze in the doorway. All eyes turned. Heat crept up her neck, but she lifted her chin. Victor's gaze flicked to her. For a fraction of a second, his eyes softened, then hardened again, business armor snapping into place. "That will be all," he said to his advisors. The tone brokered no argument. Reluctantly, they filed out, murmuring under their breath. The door shut. Silence thickened. "Victor," Selena began. He cut her off. "You shouldn't have seen that." Her pulse quickened. "I was bound to. My face is plastered across half the country's papers." His jaw tightened. He poured himself a glass of water, though his hands were steady only by force of will. "This is what happens when my world collides with yours." Selena's voice wavered between anger and ache. "And what am I to you in this world? A liability. A mistake." He met her gaze, eyes blazing. "You're neither. But they don't care what you mean to me. To them, you're leverage." The words sank into her chest like ice. That afternoon, Victor took her to his downtown Miami headquarters. The skyscraper rose like a blade against the sky, all steel and glass, untouchable in appearance. Inside, the atmosphere was colder than air conditioning could explain. Employees' eyes followed her, some curious, others disapproving. Whispers trailed in her wake like smoke. Selena squared her shoulders, and every step was an act of defiance. In the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Executives sat around a sleek obsidian table, faces tight with calculation. Screens projected numbers, charts, forecasts, all bleeding with hints of decline. Scott Enterprises cannot afford weakness, one board member snapped. Your companion is already costing us credibility. Investors want stability, not scandal. Selena's chest constricted, but Victor leaned back in his chair, exuding lethal calm. If a woman's presence shakes our empire, our foundation may be weaker than we admit. Gasps circled the room. Another voice cut in, sly and smooth. You speak of strength, Victor, but strength demands sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice? Her? Selena felt the weight of their stares like knives poised above her. Victor's reply was quiet but cutting. No. She stays. For a moment, silence ruled. The men and women around the table exchanged looks, their expressions tight with frustration. They had tested him, and he had drawn his line in the sand. Selena's throat ached, her heart thundering. She hadn't asked for this war yet, had become its weapon. Later that evening, Selena retreated to the estate's library. The carved shelves, lined with centuries of wisdom, should have comforted her, but her nerves remained raw. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Miss Smith. A male voice drawled low and sinister. You shine so brightly beside Victor Scott, but stars that burn too close to the sun tend to vanish. The line went dead. Her hands trembled as she lowered the phone. A chill swept through her colder than any headline. This wasn't just gossip. It was a threat. When she told Victor, his face darkened. He took the phone from her, scanning the number, his jaw set like stone. He said, you're not to answer calls from numbers you don't recognize, voice edged with steel. Victor, someone is targeting me, she pressed. This is not just in papers. It is real. He stepped closer, his presence a shield. I know. And that's why from now on, you don't go anywhere without protection. She bristled. Protection? You mean bodyguard shadowing me everywhere I breathe? Yes, he said flatly. If you're with me, you're a target, and I won't let anyone harm you. Selena searched his eyes, torn between fury at his control and the trembling awareness beneath it lay fear, not for himself, but for her. That night, Selena couldn't sleep. She found herself pacing the terrace, the ocean restless under the moon. Victor joined her. His tie loosened, his composure fraying at the edges. You shouldn't have to live like this, she whispered. He stared into the dark horizon. It's the only way I know how. Always fighting, always controlling, always building walls. His jaw worked, but he said nothing. Victor, she said softly, I'm not your enemy. You don't have to fight me too. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time he looked tired. Not billionaire, not warrior. Just a man worn thin by battles no one else could see. Do you think I don't want peace? He asked, voice raw. Every night I lie awake wondering what it would feel like to put it all down to breathe. Selena's breath caught. She reached for his hand, her touch feather light. Then breathe with me just for tonight. His fingers tightened around hers, and the silence between them shifted heavy with unspoken need. His gaze dipped to her lips, then flicked away, as though denying himself the very thing he craved. We shouldn't, he murmured. Maybe not, she whispered back. But we could. The air between them blazed, a fragile thread stretched taut. But before it could break, his phone rang again. He pulled away, the moment collapsing. Selena turned toward the ocean, tears stinging her eyes. She was falling for him, into his world of shadows and storms. And she knew sooner or later it would demand a price. Victor received word that one of his most significant contracts had been sabotaged the next day, and a deal months in the making had collapsed overnight, the costs spiraling. "It's deliberate," he told Selena grimly. "Someone is orchestrating this, and they'll use you to finish what they started." Selena's heart raced. "You think the threat on the phone connected?" he confirmed. Fear gripped her, but beneath it burned something fiercer. "Then teach me, Victor. Teach me your world. If I'm going to survive it, I need to understand it." His eyes searched hers, torn between refusal and recognition. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was asking to stand beside him. Finally, he nodded. "Then you'll see the lion's den." As night cloaked Miami in restless shadows, Selena stood at Victor's side, aware that her life had tilted irrevocably. She was no longer a bystander in his story. She was part of it, woven into its dangers, battles, and heart. But as she looked at him, Victor Scott, powerful and haunted, his hand brushing against hers, as if seeking anchorage, she realized something else. It wasn't just his empire that was at risk. It was her heart. The morning Miami sky was a canvas of muted silver when Selena stepped into Scott Enterprises again. She had imagined skyscrapers as symbols of triumph. Still, the closer she moved within Victor's world, the more they felt like cages of glass and steel, fragile, transparent, yet inescapably confining. Victor walked beside her, his tall frame radiating command even in silence. He had dressed not for war, but for annihilation, tailored charcoal suit, crisp shirt, no trace of hesitation. Yet she could see the tautness in his jaw, the subtle shadows beneath his eyes. They were headed into a board meeting unlike any other, one meant to question his leadership and strip it from him. Selena's heart thudded, but she refused to let fear crease her brow. If Victor trusted her to stand by him in this arena, she would not falter. The boardroom glowed with cold light, its long obsidian table polished to a mirror's edge. 12 men and women sat arrayed like judges, their eyes glittering with suspicion. The city skyline stretched behind them, a panorama of power that felt suddenly distant, unreal. Mr. Scott, the chairwoman, began, her tone honeyed but edged with steel. "Your recent choices have unsettled investors. Contracts lost, numbers slipping, whispers in the press. We must question whether your distractions have impaired your judgment." Her gaze slid deliberately to Selena. The sting of it burned, but Selena lifted her chin, meeting the woman's stare without flinching. Victor leaned forward, calm but cutting. "Scott Enterprises was built on risk and vision. You know this. If I had chosen safety over passion, none of you would be sitting in this room today. Don't mistake personal attacks for financial analysis." Murmurs spread. A man across the table, sharp-featured, raised a folder. "And yet passion seems to have bled into recklessness, a security breach in the Morales deal. Competitors were buying up our assets hours before we moved, and all while you parade your companion at galas." He snapped the folder shut. Coincidence or compromise? Selena's pulse spiked. She could feel every eye on her, slicing through her dignity. For a moment, shame threatened to suffocate her. But then she saw Victor's shoulders squared, gaze unwavering, and something within her hardened. She was not ashamed to be born. She was a woman standing where they thought she could never belong. Her voice, quiet but clear, broke the tense air. "If you believe a woman's presence can undo Victor Scott, perhaps it's not his empire that is fragile. It's yours." The room froze. The chairwoman's lips curved into a cold smile. "Bold words, Miss Smith. But this is not your battle." Victor's hand closed over Selena's under the table, subtle, unseen, yet searing with unspoken gratitude. "It is," he said firmly. "Anyone who threatens her, threatens me. And I don't negotiate with threats." The meeting adjourned hours later in a storm of clipped voices and veiled daggers. Victor led Selena into his private office, where the glass walls overlooked the sprawl of Miami below. "They won't stop," Selena murmured. Victor agreed, loosening his tie because someone inside is feeding them. Her breath caught. A traitor. More than one, likely. His gaze darkened. "I built this company brick by brick and trusted these people like family. And now?" His voice trailed off, the bitterness sharper than any blade. Selena moved closer. "Then we find them. Together." For a long moment, he just stared at her. It was as if marveling that she, who had every reason to run from this storm, chose instead to step into it with him. "You don't know what you're offering," he said quietly. She reached for his hand, her palm warm against his. "Yes, I do." Selena left the office before Victor that night, escorted by one of his security men. The lobby glittered with polished marble and golden light, but the world shifted as she entered the garage. A slip of paper had been tucked beneath the windshield wiper of her car. She unfolded it, breath catching at the words scrawled in crimson ink. "He can't protect you forever." Her hands shook. She crushed the note in her fist, heart racing. When Victor saw it later, fury ignited in his eyes. He slammed the paper onto his desk, the glass trembling beneath the force. "This isn't just business anymore," he growled. "It's war." Selena watched him pace the storm inside him, breaking through his veneer. "And what happens when that war consumes you?" she whispered. He stopped staring at her, as though she had peeled away every layer he used to shield himself. "Then let it," he said, "as long as it doesn't consume you." Her chest tightened. How he looked at her, half-feral protectiveness, half-forbidden yearning, made breathing impossible. Days bled into nights, each filled with suspicion, strategy, and sleepless hours. Selena began to glimpse the lion's den. Victor had warned her of rivals cloaked in smiles, allies who bartered loyalty for advantage, papers signed with invisible poison. But in the quiet moments between the chaos, their connection deepened. One evening, Victor returned from a confrontation, his shirt undone at the collar, exhaustion carving lines into his face. Selena found him in the library, slouched in a leather chair, a glass of scotch untouched beside him. She murmured, "You look like the world's weight finally found your shoulders." He managed a tired smile. "And yet when you walk in, it feels lighter." She crossed the room, hesitant yet compelled, until she stood before him. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand, tugging her down so she perched on the arm of his chair. For a heartbeat, silence enveloped them. Then his voice, low and ragged. "You make me forget." Her pulse skittered. "Forget what?" "That everything I touch eventually breaks." Selena cupped his cheek, her thumb brushing against the roughness of stubble. "Not me," she whispered. "You won't break me, Victor." His eyes closed as though her words were both balm and torment. When they opened again, hunger lingered there, dark and undeniable. But just as his lips inched toward hers, the door burst open. An assistant, breathless. "Mr. Scott, you need to see this." On the screen in Victor's office, numbers plummeted, stocks nosediving in real time. But worse was the leak displayed beside it, confidential documents, deals, strategies, all splashed across media outlets within minutes. Victor's face hardened into stone. Someone close. Someone with access. Selena's stomach twisted. She scanned the names, scrolling across the files, her eyes snagging on one she recognized. "Victor," she whispered, pointing. "Isn't that your—" "Yes," he cut in, his voice a blade. Betrayal burned in his eyes, deeper than rage, deeper than loss. "Someone I trusted more than anyone. His brother." The revelation left the room heavy with silence. Selena reached for Victor, but he didn't take her hand this time. He stood at the window staring at the city as though it had turned into a battlefield beneath his feet. For the first time, Selena saw the empire at risk and the man unraveling within it. And as her heart ached for him, she knew the path ahead would demand more than love. It would require sacrifice, betrayal, and the shattering of everything they had begun to build together. The penthouse at the top of Victor Scott's Miami Tower was nothing less than a citadel in the sky. At night, it seemed suspended above the city, its glass walls dissolving into the ink-dark horizon. Lights shimmered far below, fragile as constellations scattered across the earth. From here, Selena felt the world was impossibly close and achingly far. She stood barefoot against the cool marble floor near the window, her reflection merging with the skyline. Behind her, the sound of ice clinking in crystal marked Victor's presence. He poured 2 Scotch glasses, though he rarely drank more than a sip. He said, "You look like you're searching for something," his voice low-threaded with fatigue. Selena turned. "Maybe I am." His brow lifted slightly. "And what is it you hope to find out there?" She gestured to the sprawling city, a place where the noise stops, where people aren't watching every step waiting for you to slip. Victor's mouth curved faintly, not in amusement, but in recognition. "If such a place exists, I've yet to find it." He crossed the room, handing her a glass. The amber liquid caught the city lights glowing like trapped fire. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his, and a spark ran up her arm. Dangerous, undeniable. "You've been quiet since the meeting," Selena said softly. Victor leaned against the edge of the piano that sat untouched in the corner. "Quiet is safer. When I speak, the world twists my words into weapons. When I move, they call it arrogance. When I feel—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Feeling is a liability in my world." Selena sipped the scotch, the burn chasing down her throat. "So you hide it all?" His eyes found hers. Intense, unflinching. "Not from you." The admission struck her like a storm breaking through glass. She had been invisible for so long, dismissed by those who never cared to look deeper. Yet here was Victor, a man encased in armor, confessing that her presence pierced where others could not. Selena set down her glass. "You think I'm stronger than I am. I know you're stronger than you believe." His certainty wrapped around her like silk and steel. But part of her resisted, afraid of being seen too clearly. The truth pressed at her lips, and for once, she didn't stop it. "My father." She began, her voice trembling at the edges, worked 2 jobs until his heart gave out. "My mother broke under the weight of it all. I learned early that the world doesn't pause for grief. If you fall, it keeps moving. So I built walls of my own." Her gaze dropped to the city. But walls don't keep the pain out. They keep the light from getting in. When she looked back at Victor, she found him closer than before. His face softened with something she had never seen in him, ache, raw and unguarded. "I thought I was alone in this," he whispered. "No one could understand what it means to lose and keep losing, until you have nothing left but the shell of yourself." Selena reached for him without thinking, her hand brushing against his cheek. His skin was warm, his breath uneven. "You're not alone anymore," she said. The silence that followed was thick, charged. He leaned into her touch, his eyes searching hers, as though asking permission he had never sought from anyone. And then slowly, his lips found hers. It was not the kiss of a billionaire accustomed to taking what he wanted. It was hesitant trembling at the edges, like a man rediscovering how to hope. Selena's heart surged, her body pressing closer as his hands framed her face with a reverence that made her ache. The city blurred behind them, their entire world reduced to the taste of each other, the fragile certainty that they had found something worth breaking for. When they pulled apart, foreheads resting together, Victor's breath shuddered. "You make me want more than I ever thought I deserved." Selena's tears threatened to spill not from sorrow, but from the terrifying swell of emotion she could no longer deny. "And you make me believe I don't have to fight the world alone." But just as the moment's fragile beauty settled between them, a sound split the air. Victor's phone was vibrating against the glass table. He initially ignored it, desperate to hold on to her a little longer. But when it buzzed again, insistent, he pulled away, his features hardening as he glanced at the screen. A single word displayed: unknown. He answered. "Scott." Selena watched his expression change instantly, from irritation to steel to fury. His hand clenched around the phone. "If you touch her," his voice dropped deadly quiet, "I will bury you." Selena's breath caught. He ended the call with a slam reverberating like a gunshot. "Victor," she asked, fear creeping into her voice. He turned, his eyes darker than she had ever seen. "They know. They've seen us. And now they're using you to get to me." Selena's chest constricted. "What did they say? That you're leveraging?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a lion trapped in a cage. "You'll pay the price if I don't comply with their demands." Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Then let them come. I won't be your weakness." His eyes snapped to hers, fierce. "Don't ever say that. You are not weak, Selena. You're the only thing keeping me from drowning." For a heartbeat, silence swallowed them both. The city beyond seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Victor exhaled, his voice breaking. "But if anything happens to you because of me..." He shook his head, unable to finish. Selena stepped forward, laying her hand on his chest, where his heart thundered beneath. "Then, fight for me. For us. Don't let them take this away before it's even begun." His eyes closed, as though her words were the only tether keeping him from shattering. When they opened again, determination burned there, fierce and absolute. "They won't touch you," he vowed. "I'll burn down the world first." Later that night, Selena lay awake in the vastness of Victor's bed, listening to the rhythm of his breathing beside her. She should have been afraid of the threats, the war brewing in shadows, the man who had become both shield and firestorm. Yet, instead of fear, she felt an aching certainty. She was no longer a bystander in his world. She was entwined in it, for better or worse. And as the first light of dawn crept through the glass walls painting Victor's face in gold, Selena knew with absolute clarity that she could not walk away. What they had begun was fragile, dangerous, perhaps doomed. But it was also the most real thing she had ever known. The storm that had lingered at the edge of their world finally arrived. For days after the anonymous threat, Victor tightened his grip on Selena's safety. She no longer walked alone. Every step shadowed by men in tailored suits, whose eyes never wavered from the streets. The penthouse became both fortress and cage. At night, she could feel his tension even in sleep. His arm curved protectively around her, as though guarding her from phantoms. But in the daylight, she saw the cracks forming in him. Victor's voice, once a steady instrument of command, grew sharp with frustration during his calls. Deals slipped through his fingers as investors balked at rumors spreading across Manhattan's boardrooms. Newspapers whispered of corruption, betrayal, Victor Scott's empire teetering. And at the center of it all was her. Selena knew it, though he never said it aloud. The tabloids had plastered her face across front pages. The billionaire's dark secret. They reduced her name, her dignity to scandal. And though she carried herself with unbroken pride, the sting cut deep. One evening, as the Miami sky blushed crimson, she found him on the balcony with a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. His posture resembled a man carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed the storm within. "You're losing sleep again," she murmured. He didn't turn to her. "Sleep is a luxury I can't afford." She stepped closer, slipping her hand against his arm. "Then lean on me. You don't have to fight this alone." Finally, he looked at her, and in that gaze, she caught something that froze her heart: resignation. The following morning, Victor disappeared into meetings that stretched endlessly. Selena waited in the penthouse, anxiety clawing at her with each hour. By nightfall, when he returned, his face was pale, his jaw set with ruthless determination. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. The words chilled her. They sat opposite one another, the table between them, suddenly feeling like a canyon. "I've been given an ultimatum." He began, his fingers drumming once before stilling. "The board, my enemies, whoever orchestrated this chaos, they're united in one thing, you." Her pulse raced. "Me. They think you're the liability that can break me. They want you gone, Selena. And if I refuse," his voice cracked before hardening, "they'll destroy everything, not just the company. Every person is tied to me. Every life is under my responsibility." Her breath hitched. "So that's it. They point at me and you surrender." His hands clenched. "Don't make this more complicated than it already is." She rose, her chest heaving. "You promised me I wasn't your weakness. You swore I lied." The words shattered between them like glass against marble. Selena staggered back as though struck. His eyes were merciless, but she saw the flicker beneath the agony he tried to bury. "You don't belong in my world." Victor pressed each word jagged. "You're drowning because of me, and I won't drag you under." "Say what you mean," she whispered, her throat tight. His silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then, with a steadiness that nearly broke him, Victor said, "Leave, Selena, and don't come back." She shook her head, tears burning. "You don't mean that." "I do." Her tears fell, but she refused to let them silence her. "You're a coward, Victor Scott. You'd rather tear us apart than risk fighting for what's real." The words sliced him open, though he didn't flinch. He had rehearsed this cruelty in his mind, knowing it was the only way to make her walk away. When she finally left, the door closing behind her with a sound too final, Victor crumpled in the silence. His glass shattered against the wall, amber liquid bleeding onto the floor. Alone, he pressed his fists to his face, the man the world believed unshakable, breaking where no one could see. Brooklyn welcomed her back, not with comfort, but with whispers. Neighbors eyed her with pity, some with disdain, as if her brush with Victor's world had tainted her. The cafe where she once worked refused to rehire her, citing unwanted attention. At night, she replayed their last conversation in her small Harlem apartment. His voice, his eyes. The cruelty she knew was only armor. Yet knowledge didn't lessen the ache. She lay awake listening to the city hum outside, wondering how a love so consuming could vanish like smoke. She told herself to hate him, to forget. But her heart betrayed her with every memory. His laugh rare but warm, his hand steady against hers, the kiss that had promised more than words could. Victor in shadows. Meanwhile, Victor became colder and more challenging. At meetings, he was a blade unsheathed, slashing through opposition ruthlessly. The tabloids marveled at his resilience, painting him as a man reborn in ice. But behind closed doors, his nights were haunted by absence. He reached for her in sleep, only to wake with empty arms. He avoided the balcony, where they had once stood together, the piano she had brushed her fingers against. Even the scotch tasted like ash without her laughter to soften it. One evening, his oldest confidant confronted him. "You're unraveling," the man said. Victor's reply was cold. "I'm surviving." But survival without her felt like death stretched endlessly. The enemies who had demanded Selena's removal were not satisfied with her departure. Rumors still circled a noose tightening around Victor's empire, and in whispers he overheard there were darker currents, suggestions that Selena remained a target not for scandal, but vengeance. That knowledge tormented him. He had driven her away to protect her, but what if he had only left her more vulnerable? At midnight, he stood alone on his balcony phone, in hand her number glowing on the screen. His thumb hovered over the call button, trembling with the weight of what he longed to say. But he didn't press it. Instead, he whispered into the night, "Forgive me." Weeks passed. Selena, battered but unbroken, began to rebuild. She volunteered at a community center in Harlem, teaching children whose laughter reminded her of light in darkness. The work steadied her, giving her purpose beyond the shadow of Victor's name. Yet, beneath her resilience, a flame still burned. She loved him not for his wealth or empire, but for the man hidden beneath, and she couldn't shake the sense that his cruelty had been a mask. While closing the center one evening, she overheard two men speaking in hushed tones outside. The words froze her blood. "Victor Scott. Leverage. She's still the key." Her heart pounded. She had been right. His rejection wasn't born of disdain. It was sacrifice. Selena stood in the doorway of her apartment that night, staring at the city stretched before her. The same skyline that had once felt distant now shimmered with resolve. They thought they could use her as bait. They thought Victor's love could be broken by force. But they had underestimated her. Wiping her tears, Selena squared her shoulders. She whispered, "I'll give them one if they want a fight." And in that moment, the woman the tabloids had called a liability became something else entirely, the storm no one saw coming. The city glittered like 1,000 diamonds scattered across black velvet, but beneath its brilliance, war brewed. Victor Scott stood in the boardroom of his empire, surrounded by men who smelled of power and fear. They spoke in half-truths and veiled threats, pretending civility while sharpening knives meant for his back. And in the middle of their schemes was her name, Selena Smith. They had branded her as a scandal weakness and the dark thread that could unravel his golden life. But what they did not understand, what they would never understand, was that she was the very reason he still breathed. For weeks he had silenced himself, burying love under lies. He had let her walk away, convincing himself it was protection. Yet each day without her had hollowed him, until nothing remained but a man in a suit of armor too heavy to bear. And now, as whispers reached him that Selena herself was in danger, the truth ignited like fire in his chest. If he lost her, none of this mattered. Selena walked the children out of the community center in Harlem with her usual calm, but her thoughts burned with urgency. The overheard whispers replayed in her mind. She's still the key. For too long, she had been painted as the fragile piece on someone else's chessboard. But Selena Smith was no pawn. That evening, she met quietly with a journalist. She trusted a woman who had once been her college friend. She laid everything out, the threats, the orchestrated scandal, the manipulation of Victor's empire. Selena whispered that they want to destroy him, and they're using me as their weapon. Her friend's pen flew across the page. Then we expose them. All of them. Selena felt strength flow back into her bones for the first time in weeks. She would not wait for Victor to save her. She would stand beside him, not behind. The confrontation came not in shadows, but under chandeliers. Manhattan's elite gathered at a gala to restore confidence in Scott International Holdings. The Waldorf ballroom shimmered with opulence. Women in sequined gowns floated like swans. Men in tailored suits exchanged whispers over champagne. At the center stood Victor, tall, immaculate, but colder than ice. His enemies circled sharks, scenting blood in the water. And then the doors opened. Every head turned. Selena Smith entered the room. Her gown was midnight silk, her skin radiant beneath the lights, her gaze unflinching. The crowd gasped, scandal and awe colliding in one breath. Whispers spread like wildfire. She dares to show her face. Hasn't he cast her aside? Victor's heart stopped. For weeks he had trained himself not to reach for her. But seeing her now, walking toward him with the quiet power of a queen, he realized the lie he had lived. She was not his weakness. She was his salvation. Selena stepped onto the stage, where the microphone awaited the keynote speaker. Gasps rippled through the room. She was not invited. But her voice, when it rang out, silenced every murmur. They told you I was a liability. They told you I was a scandal, a mistake. But the truth is... Her eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and fearless. I am the woman they feared. Not because I could destroy Victor Scott, but because I could stand beside him and refuse to be erased. She lifted a folder of documents, evidence the journalist had verified. These men you trust. These so-called allies, they orchestrated the lies, the threats, the blackmail. Not to protect this company, but to steal it. The room erupted in chaos. Faces paled, voices rose. Cameras flashed. And then for the first time in weeks, Victor moved. He joined her on stage, his hand finding hers with deliberate clarity. She speaks the truth, Victor said, his voice thundering. I let them convince me she was my weakness. But tonight, I tell you, she is my strength. And together, we will not bow. Security escorted the guilty men out under flashing bulbs of paparazzi cameras. The press devoured the scandal, but the headlines were not Selena's shame. This time, they were her vindication. Victor Scott and Selena Smith expose corporate conspiracy. Victor finally allowed the walls to fall back at the penthouse that night. He cupped her face with trembling hands, his eyes dark with regret. I broke us to save you, he confessed, his voice raw. And in doing so, I nearly lost everything. Forgive me, Selena. Her tears glistened, but her smile was steady. You don't need forgiveness. You need to learn that love isn't weakness. It's war, Victor. And we fight it together. Their kiss was not just a reconciliation. It was a vow. Months later, the empire stood stronger than ever, rebuilt on the foundations of truth. Selena returned to work with children, but now she has Victor's resources behind her. Together, they founded initiatives in Harlem, bridging worlds once divided by wealth and race. At public events, they no longer hid. She stood beside him, elegant and proud, his hand in hers, as if it had always belonged there. And though whispers still followed them, they no longer wounded. For every critic, there were 10 who saw them as what they truly were. Proof that love, when fought for, could withstand any storm. On a quiet evening, Selena leaned against the balcony railing. The city spread before them in golden light. Victor slipped behind her, his arms encircling her waist. Do you regret it? He asked softly. She turned her head to meet his gaze. Never. Because in the end, Love was worth the war. He kissed her temple, his heart at peace for the first time in years. And as the camera of the story panned back, leaving them silhouetted against the skyline, the narrator's voice carried to the viewers, gentle, inviting, and filled with warmth. Love isn't always easy. Sometimes it demands sacrifice. Sometimes it means standing against the world. But when it's genuine, it's worth every battle. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and follow this channel for more tales of love, resilience, and hope. Because somewhere out there, your story is waiting too.